Left, Right, in the Middle is made possible through grant funding by SRCI, the Student Research and Creativity Institute at Saginaw Valley State University. SRCI, your dream, your project, your research.
Pick me a town in any clime where people like a rockin' time. Stay awake both day and night till everybody's feeling good and right. Then throw me a smack dab in the middle. Pitch me a smack dab in the middle. Throw me, hey, smack dab in
Liberals, they think it's morally superior to redistribute wealth and take from one group of people and give to another group of people. Isn't it always conservatives? Aren't we the ones that are often told we're imposing values? But it's the left that has always done that.
They're stuck with Reagan. They're stuck with the idea that government is always the problem. There are a lot of Republicans up in Capitol Hill right now who are calling for a spending freeze in the middle of a recession/depression. That is insane. But they are thinking the way they thought in 1982, if we can only think that way again. Reagan was great for his era, but it's time to move on.
Hello. Welcome to Left, Right, in the Middle, a podcast exploring the gray areas of political debates. And what's this gray area? Well, it's the area in the middle where both sides can come together and reach an agreement on an issue. Since this is the inaugural episode of the podcast, I thought that I'd first imply some background on the show's origins. The show started out just as a pitch project in the class I took at SVSU, a digital journalism course. We had to pitch a media project that we would present to the class at the end of the semester, and this project was what I pitched. The following semester I took a grant writing class, and in that class I needed to find a client to write an actual grant for, and I decided that I would be my own client. I wrote a grant and submitted it to SRCI, the Student Research and Creativity Institute at Saginaw Valley State University. And since you are listening to this show right now, obviously the grant was successful. The project consists of this podcast, a Facebook page, which I would like to use as a forum for discussions about the issues that I talk about, and a website where you can download these episodes, listen to these episodes directly, or I'm going to provide links to show resources, links to different news outlets, so you could directly go to my site and use that as kind of a jumping board to go to different news outlet sites, and ways to contact your government. So check out the site and see what's inside there and what you can use to educate yourself about issues. As far as myself, why am I qualified to produce this show? Why would you want to listen to me? Well, I'm a student studying technical writing and political science at Saginaw Valley State University. I've received awards for both writing and multimedia production. I've been praised for my ability to research a topic, to recognize an audience, to present my thoughts in plain speak so that my audience can understand, a general audience can kind of follow my arguments. And probably more so as far as the education that I've received obviously is a huge thing, but I think the real world experience I have is what qualifies me to kind of in the combination with the education, because I'm not a traditional student. I'm 40 years old. I returned to school after about a 20-year hiatus, and so I've lived in the real world. I think the typical 18, 19, 20-year-old undergraduate political science student, can write a good paper, can present themselves as being knowledgeable in certain subjects, but they don't have that experience as to how the real world applies to them, where it is their places in the real world, how it affects their everyday life. So beyond my real world experience, I just believe that my studies at SVSU have given me a broader knowledge of the American political system and world politics itself. And I hope to kind of apply my real world experience with my political knowledge, with my research ability to present topics in an interesting way, in a way that provides information to the listener so that they can go check out the resources, decide where it is that you stand on an issue, And then beyond that, which is the ultimate goal, is decide where it is that we can meet on an issue, where it is that we can actually get something done in this country. So my expectations for the show, beyond kind of what I just talked about, is I want to produce a show every 2 weeks. This is going to run through April 2013 when my grant funding runs out. After which, if I can receive further funding, I definitely will seek that. But I think that really depends on the success of the show, how many listeners I have, and if it really makes any sense to go any further with the show. But I've been given the money to do what I'm going to do for the next several months, and hopefully it'll pick up some audience. Some people appreciate what it is that I'm trying to do, and if you do, definitely pass the word along. Share this on Facebook, share it with your friends, whatever way that you can do it. And I want the show to provide information that helps people educate themselves about relevant political topics. I plan on doing shows on a number of topics. Don't really have any set schedule for a show. I want to just kind of react to, uh, the political climate of the time. If something seems really topical, obviously I'm going to do a show on that topic. For instance, my next show is going to be on healthcare. I think that's still pretty much a hot. It could be healthcare or gun control. Could maybe be a hot topic right now, but I think I'm going to do it on healthcare. I also may do shows on, say, the tax code, on Social Security, climate change, the budget, energy policy, the war on drugs, education in America, welfare, immigration, and there's obviously more. There's just a few, and I'm going to do roughly 17 or 18 shows. So feel free to let me know if there is a topic that you are particularly interested in, one that I may have mentioned, or definitely one that I didn't mention. Um, as kind of the way the show is going to work, I'm going to offer up my research and analysis on a topic, try to present both sides' point of view on the topic, then kind of see how that point of view really matches up with the research and analysis concerning the topic. The website, like I said, is going to provide links for the resources for people to go to, so that if I say, this this research shows this poll shows this, I'm going to show you where you can find that information. I'm going to try to use reputable sources that aren't slanted from one side or the other, maybe research institutes, the Government Accountability Office, the Congressional Budget Office, things like that. And then ultimately, I want the forum discussion to really be where this leads, so that people of all political persuasions can come together, can actually have a dialogue about the topics that we're discussing for those few weeks. I don't want these to be arguments. I want them to be dialogues. I want there to be discourse. I want people to be able to get their point of view across, but do it in a way that has courtesy for the other point of view. And I think that's key here, is actually looking at the other point of view, kind of putting yourself in the shoes of another person. Uh, if this is just going to turn into an argument and to a last hit fight, then there's really no point in the project, because you can get that in about 1,000 other media projects, pundit-driven projects that you can, or pundit-driven media sources that you can find. This isn't the Rush Limbaugh show. This isn't the Keith Olbermann show. This is hopefully going to be a show where people actually can talk about an issue and can try to come to some kind of consensus. So let's work together to find ways to address the issues that matter to us most.
Tell me something about the world. Tell me something about the hurt. Something I don't want to know. Something I should never know. Tell me something about the world. Tell me something about the hurt. Something I don't want to.
So for my first show, I'm going to actually kind of step away from actually talking about a real issue. I would just like to talk a little bit about ideologies. So I think this can help set up some framework for any future discussions that we have. In the opening, I had Sean Hannity there talking about liberals' desire to distribute wealth and claiming that liberals say conservatives want to impose values, but it's the left that always does that. And then David Brooks talking about how the Republican Party is frozen in time. And these are just some examples of how modern media really just kind of snipes. Whether it's like a pundit who kind of supports one particular ideology, they just kind of snipe at the opposing side, and they don't really want to talk about an issue. So that's kind of why I wanted to kind of have that for the opening, just to kind of set that up, to kind of give a little soundbite on where media is right now, and it's probably been like that a long time. It's been that really as far as I can remember, but it does just seem like it's getting worse. There doesn't seem to be any attempt at really trying to find a way to get matters, issues solved. It's really just a matter of trying to show who's right, who's wrong, who can you know come out looking better than the other party, with the actual results be damned. So I think that in order to have a viable discussion about a political issue, that those on the opposing sides need to understand the other's position or point of view. And you too often hear labels placed on people, particularly presidents, that bestow on them a particular ideology. I mean, you always hear that Obama is a socialist or a Marxist. Bush was often labeled as a fascist. But what does this really mean? You could probably ask somebody who uses one of those monikers, and they probably wouldn't even be able to tell you what it means, but they'll say it. Do these monikers fit? Well, they don't really fit. Obama's not a socialist or a Marxist. Bush wasn't a fascist, and we'll probably talk about a little bit more about that as the podcast goes on. I think probably part of the problem is that too many people pick up these buzzwords from the pundit-driven news programs, and a lot of these shows really aren't even news. They're just opinion meant to sway a viewer in a particular ideal. And what's probably the most problematic is that people tend to seek out information that really reinforces or supports the ideals that they already possess. So they feed on this. These programs feed on this. They present information that can help people win arguments that they already have a position on, and don't want to actually even see the other side. So once again, that's hopefully what this show will do, is find ways to get people to actually have a discussion about a particular issue. So actually, this show is going to be about ideology. So to start out, we're going to need the definition of an ideology, and I took this basically directly from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So an ideology is a systematic body of concepts, especially about human life or culture. That was A. B. A manner or content of thinking characteristic of an individual, group, or culture. And C. The integrated assertions, theories, and aims that constitute a socio-political program. So in a nutshell, it's an individual's way of seeing the world, their worldview, as it pertains to their political and cultural values. An ideology is not it's not the gospel. An ideology is basically what you believe, how you see the world. And how are these ideologies formed? Well, the German sociologist Theodor Adorno argued that ideology has psychological roots and personality traits, basically saying it's hereditary. Karl Marx believed that ideology is a rationalization of interest, basically meaning ideology is more systematic than automatic, that you react to the culture around you, to your surroundings, and your ideology is formed through that. I think it's all of the above. I think ideology is both systematic and automatic. You're going to get some traits from your parents. Most people probably do follow their parents' ideology. If your parents are conservative, you're probably going to be conservative. If your parents are liberal, you're probably going to be liberal. It doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the case, but there's probably a good chance. But then you do also react to your surroundings, to how you see the world, to how the world how you work within the world. People that are more rural, I think, tend to be more conservative. People that are more urban tend to be more liberal. And I think, and as I get further in my notes here as to what I really want to talk about, I think that really makes sense, considering that rural people tend to see themselves as more individualistic, and urban people tend to see themselves as truly living in a society. So, kind of keep that in mind as this conversation goes on. One thing that's true, though, is that ideological thinkers aspire to develop good theories of social order and justice, and to persuade others that they're right. And I myself obviously have an ideology. This show really in itself is about presenting an ideology, which is the ideology of working together, of comedy. That's not comedy, comity. But what is my ideology? I just want to be very open with the listeners, let them know where I stand on an issue. So as I go forward, whenever I'm talking about these issues, I want to try to be as impartial as I can, but I definitely have my views. I consider myself to be kind of a democratic socialist. What that basically means is I believe that we need a mix of socialism and capitalism to make this country work. You can sell anything you want in the free market. If you design a widget and want to sell it, good for you. Sell it and make millions of dollars. But I think certain things, such as healthcare, such as education, and possibly even energy. But I'm not going to go that far and create that kind of uproar that people might react to that. But those things should basically be provided. Uh, Healthcare to me is a human right. It doesn't make sense to me that you know, people can become billionaires off of somebody else's health. And education only makes sense. We should give our kids an education up to 4 years of college, and really society will benefit from it. And I'm not going to go too far into any of these discussions right now. I'm actually not going to go any farther at all because those will be topics that we can discuss later. Um, but I'm going to give you some of my other stances really quickly on some other issues, so you just kind of know where I stand. Religion, I guess I'm atheist, but I do kind of practice Buddhism in a certain way. I believe in Buddhist tenets at least, and I believe that Christianity was basically based off of Buddhist tenets. So, I don't believe in God. I'm going to be very honest about that, but I do believe in I guess a certain spirituality, and I believe in being a good person. And I'm assuming a lot of my listeners, at least from the get-go, are going to be people that know me, and I think they could attest to that. As far as abortion goes, I will never do a show on abortion. But my stance on abortion is I am against abortion, but pro-choice. So, try to wrap that around your mind. Why is that? Well, I would like to live in a world where nobody has to have an abortion. But we live in a world where that's a reality, and we could make it illegal, and people are still going to do it. And I believe in harm reduction. If we make it illegal, people are going to do it, and it's going to create more problems than it's worth. So I would like to work together to try to create a world where somebody feels they don't have to have an abortion. And that's probably about all I'm going to say about abortion for the rest of the history of the show. I believe in gay rights. I believe in everybody's rights. But, a lot of people have gotten their rights now in this country. And, now it seems like gay rights is kind of a hot issue right now as far as, which group is seeking rights. As far as gun control goes, I believe anybody should be able to own any weapon they want, even including a tank, as long as they are qualified to use that weapon is registered, and that's basically it. You know, I don't see why anybody should be limited in pretty much anything they do. My stance on drugs is why are drugs illegal? It's a personal choice as an adult that if you want to do drugs. Prostitution, the same way. Why is prostitution illegal? If you want to be a prostitute, be a prostitute. It's your body. That's your asset. That's how you can make money. Hey, more power to you. I wouldn't recommend it as a profession, but I don't see why it's illegal. I believe climate change is definitely happening. Um, all the science points to that. Anytime you can kind of find a naysayer who might want to use anything against climate change happening, usually can, kind of represents that 2% of the scientists. And, what the answers are, I don't know, but yeah, I believe it's happening, and I believe we need to do something about it. It doesn't make sense that we're basically the only animal that destroys the environment that they live in. As far as labor goes, I believe in unions, and I may possibly do a show on that. That's kind of a hot button issue is right now too, with the way teachers and things like that have been kind of criticized for how their labor unions have destroyed budgets. But I definitely think I want to do a show on that and kind of show that maybe that's not necessarily the case. But there's got to be a middle ground there where labor can't just uh, hold the executives hostage, hold the company hostage, or the government hostage, depending on what type of labor we're talking about here. But I believe in unions, and I believe that unions, post World War II up into probably the 1980s, really built the economy, built us a strong economy. And the way the unions have really started to decline from 1980, I think kind of you can watch the decline of the economy itself along with that, because the middle class is declining. As far as war goes, I don't see any reason to ever have a war. I'm a pacifist myself. I don't think we have fought a war that's been worth fighting since World War II. I don't want to take away from any soldier that's fought in a war, that's been injured or given their life for a war since World War II. That's their choice. I just feel our government sends them to war for the wrong reasons. Uh, Vietnam, Korea, the Gulf Wars. Maybe the first Gulf War, because we went in, we liberated Kuwait, and we got out, and Bush made the right decision. That's Bush won. But I was against Clinton going into Kosovo. I was against any of these recent excursions in the Middle East. And I don't mind us being part of, say, a UN project that goes in and takes care of a situation, as long as we put in the same amount as every other country. I don't know why we seem to have to put in 90 to 100% of all the effort when it comes to these issues that come up in the world. But I mean, I have my thoughts on that, and I think that it's related to capitalism, and I'll definitely probably discuss that in a further show. Welfare, I believe in welfare, but I believe that in the 90s, Clinton and the Republicans in the House did a great job of kind of fixing welfare. Is to before that, people could definitely stay on welfare a long time. Now, if you look at welfare, there's certain provisions as to what you can get, how long you can get it, and I don't really think that's even that much of an issue anymore. I know people still feel that welfare is too much of a burden on the budget, but I don't think they're really too knowledgeable then as to what it really does to the budget. And for full disclosure, when I returned to school for the first couple of years, I was receiving food stamps from my family. Got a couple. I just had another son, but at the time I had a son. I'm married, and I was receiving some financial aid. I was working a couple of jobs part time, but I was going to school full time, and I was receiving food stamps. And I have no problem with that. I didn't feel ashamed of buying food with food stamps. That's the way life goes sometimes. I spent 20 years working, paying taxes, and the government hold me up just for a few years, and in the end, I'm going to have a degree, I'm going to have a better job, and I'm going to start paying higher taxes. And I don't mind paying taxes. I think the tax code where it's at right now is pretty good. And if everybody had to take a bump up, and I say everybody, I always talk about maybe that top percent paying more taxes, and yes, I think they should, but why not everybody pay just a little bit more in taxes to try to get this budget under control? But I think a huge part of that should be just cut military spending in half, and we've pretty much solved the problem. But that could be a show in itself. Immigration, I think we worry way too much about immigration. Build a fence along the Mexican border. They're going to get around it, so we could spend $1 billion building the fence. It's not going to stop people from getting in. We need to address that issue in different ways. And I think most of us need to remember, unless you're a true blood American Indian, that we were all immigrants at one time. Our family descended from immigrants. They come to this country, and maybe for that first generation, these people they kind of live within their own culture. But the studies have shown that as you get into the second and third generation, they become Americanized. They learn English, and stop worrying about what language people are speaking or what flag they're flying. They're going to be Americans. That's why they came to America, and we spend way too much time on issues like this. And as far as the president goes, I think we worry too much about the president. The president doesn't really have that much power. It's the Congress that has the power. So let's stop worrying so much about the president. Stop, thinking that the president makes all the policy. The president didn't write Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. He didn't write that. He may have given some input into it, but that's written by congressmen, by staffers, and any bills that way. So I think too many people think that the president is just this all-encompassing power in America, and that is definitely not the case. The president is a figurehead who has the ultimate decision on a bill. He can veto it, he can sign it, but even if he vetoes it, Congress could override a veto if they have enough votes. So the president can definitely kind of set down policy. He can say what he wants, but he can't just do it. Although I would say, going back to Bush and now Obama, I think they are trying to find ways to give the president more power, and that's something we do need to push back against. But as we move forward with discussions here in this show, I think we need to try to avoid what I think our politicians or even the pundits get into right now, is what if you are familiar with what is called a zero-sum game. And what a zero-sum game is this thought that for every point my opponent gets, I lose a point. Or if you're talking money, for every dollar this guy gets, I lose a dollar. And that's not how you can look at a situation. That's not how you can look at an issue. We've got to understand that at times maybe you're going to lose some, you're going to win some when it comes to political fights. But just if you get a win, it doesn't mean the other person lost. And if we can find ways that the win-win situation is obviously the best case scenario, but it's not always a win-lose situation.
There was a tiny Asian woman screaming in the street today, and she was screaming at a person that she obviously hates. She was so loud we heard the screaming with our windows all rolled up, and we looked down on the street to see who she was screaming at. But there was no one on
sidewalk, so we all looked back at her, and we saw in her homeless hands she had a 1960s mirror, a pretty plastic girly one framed in a purple case, and she was screaming at herself, and she was spitting at her face. And we were scared and we were shaking, waiting at the intersection, looking at each other's faces, each one a shocked reflection. We laugh with nervous laughter at the crazies in the street, but it's only 'cause we know it's how we kind of want to be. And there's a fraction of a brain cell chain that makes us what we are. One false move, you're in the mirror, someone's laughing from the car.
So to talk about ideologies, I mean, there's many ideologies or political theories that I could speak of on this podcast. You know, socialism, communism, Marxism, democracy, capitalism, liberalism, conservatism, libertarianism, fascism, anarchism, nihilism, feudalism, totalitarianism. I could keep going on with the isms, but I'm not going to go into depth on each one. I'd like to just discuss the ones that directly affect the political discourse in America. So first, let's look at the three ideologies that are often associated and too often confused with each other: socialism, communism, and Marxism. And one of my pet peeves, as I alluded to earlier, is when somebody just labels somebody a Marxist or a communist or a socialist, such as often gets done with any kind of liberal candidate. And I even at one point, this was back during the election when when Obama was running against McCain. I'm not going to disclose any names here. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I had somebody that said that Obama is a Marxist. So I just asked that person, well, what is a Marxist? And that person, and I'm not making this up, that person says, I don't know, but he is one. And that's part of the big problem in America today is, you can be told somebody is something and you just say, okay, he or she is, and that's it. You don't even know what the definition is. It's kind of as bad as at the Tea Party rallies with people holding up signs saying, keep your government hand off of my Medicare. I mean, that's pathetic. People need to educate themselves. So I'm gonna first start out with a definition of these three ideologies, and these once again are just taken directly from Webster's, and then kind of just discuss a little bit. Socialism is any of various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration or regulation of the means of production and distributions of goods. And the government ownership will definitely scare some people, but I think what's key here is the regulation. And that's, as my stance on saying being a democratic socialist, is the regulation aspect of it. Communism is a theory advocating elimination of private property in a system in which goods are owned in common and are available to all as needed. So that's kind of even more of a step up from socialism, where everything is just owned in common. It's commonly owned communism. It's pretty simple. Marxism is a theory and practice of socialism, including the labor theory of value, dialectical materialism, the class struggle, and dictatorship of the proletariat until the establishment of a classless society. And that's key here is until the establishment of a classless society. And I'll definitely get more into Marxism and what it is that Marx really envisioned. And it's not the communism you see today. So communism was born from Marxism, which as a definition stated, it's a theory and practice of socialism. But there's definitely some clear distinctions between the three. Socialism, especially say how they use it in Europe or even what we have here in America. So we do have some socialist programs here in America. Some of our health care with Medicare, Medicaid, and you could even look at our education system up to through high school is a socialist system. But it's a way that the government provides certain goods to the citizens. Communism doesn't really believe in private ownership of, say, industry and things like that. So the government really runs all of that. Marxism was a theory that kind of used socialist ideas to rein in everything, to present things in common so that the people could really take control of the means of production, take control of the government, and create a true democracy. And that's ultimately what Marx wanted, was a true democracy, which is something I don't think people really understand, is we don't have a true democracy in America. We have a representative republic. A true democracy means that the people truly control what it is they want. If 51% of people want something, they will get it. That's democracy. And I don't necessarily think that. I think what we have is good, the representative republic, because and that's what the forefathers really saw, was that they didn't want the whims of the public controlling policy, and that's why they set it up the way they did. But I trying to talk about talk about Marxism so that people really understand what it is, because I think that's probably the least understood out of any of the political theories is Marxism. Marxism doesn't mean communism. It doesn't mean socialism. It uses it as a means to democracy. So I'm not trying to promote Marxism here. I've definitely studied a lot of Marxism, and I do believe in a lot of Marxist thought. I don't want this to come across as that I'm advocating for Marxism, as hopefully you will see. I'm kind of in all of the above. I think there's certain aspects of a lot of these ideologies that we can use to really create a society that can benefit everybody. But I do want to talk real quickly about kind of just some Marxist theory, so you can kind of just really understand what it is that Marx wanted or Marx thought. His theory was born out of a societal transformation created by the Industrial Revolution, and he believed that his transformation created an imbalance in which those who possessed the means exploited those who didn't by way of labor. That the haves were exploiting the have-nots. They were the bourgeoisie, as he called them, and what you could say now could be like the top capitalists, the bankers, and things like that. They they used labor to benefit themselves, and labor didn't get their due out of it. Um, in the Communist Manifesto, Marx wrote that the bourgeoisie, and this is a quote, the bourgeoisie has left, remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of the numberless indefeasible chartered freedoms, has set up that single, unconscionable freedom, free trade. Later, he went on to assert that, and this is a quote, the need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the whole surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. Basically meaning that it continually needs to expand. It needs to expand and exploit labor for the resources, for the capital gains to all corners of the globe. And this is something that Marx feared, something that Marx warned about. And I think if you really look, that is what's happening. You know, without breaking off into a whole sidebar, my thoughts on what's going on in the Middle East, it's not about freedom. It's about getting resources. It's about getting a toehold in certain areas so that capitalism can spread there. And you can't force that on a society. They have to want it. They have to want democracy or more capitalistic goals or ideals. They have to want that from within. And I think that's why we've been stuck 10 years in these areas, because you can't just go say, here's a McDonald's, live your life, have fun. So ultimately, Marx he wasn't a fascist. I think people think Marxism is a fascist ideal. Marx believed in freedom, and he based his theory on the principle of maximum equal freedom, which states that there is to be a maximum equal system of negative freedom, meaning freedom from the undue interference of others, positive freedom, the opportunity to determine one's own life, including A, the right to equal participation in social decision making, B, the right of equal access to the means of self-realization, which entails the right to an equal opportunity to obtain social offices and positions, and the right to an equal opportunity to acquire other social primary goods. It sounds pretty much like what we have here, except for I would even say that the right to an equal opportunity to obtain social offices and positions isn't that we don't have that in America. Why don't we have that in America? We do in theory, but if you don't have $1 million, if you don't have $1 billion, you're not gonna get into office in America. I mean, look at most of our politicians are millionaires. To affect America on a grand scale, to become a senator, become a congressman, become the president, you've got to be a millionaire. And so not everybody does have the equal opportunity. Marx believed everybody should have the equal opportunity. Marx wanted the workers to control the means of production because he believed that the present system of producing and appropriating products is based on the exploitation of the many by the few. Labor wasn't valued, it's exploited. And I have to agree with him 100%. But that's where we have to find that middle ground. How can we find an area where labor gets their due, where labor gets what it's worth, and those who put the money up, say the venture capitalists, they still get a return on it. I think the return right now is way too skewed, especially when you look at the gap between the wealthy and the poor and how that has really skyrocketed over, say, the last 20 to 30 years. We're not asking they talk about this distribution of wealth. We're not really asking for them to just give money to people. We're asking them to give them what they're worth. So, as I said, Marx saw his system as a path to a true democracy, a people's democracy. He didn't intend an agrarian society such as Russia to become communist. He wanted his theory, his practice meant, say, something like Germany, which was an already industrialized nation, to become communist. They had the means of production there. Now, when Russia became communist, they weren't producing much, so really all it became was a dictatorship. And Stalin, or before Stalin, Lenin bastardized what communism should be. He took really the only part he took was Marx's vision of a revolution. He took the revolution and then just changed the whole game, and everybody thought that was Marx's vision, but it wasn't. That's not what Marx wanted. China would probably be the closest example to Marx's vision, but they're still slow going. They started out communism before they were really industrialized. Now they're really becoming industrialized, and it's really just a matter of if they're going to release the reins a bit and allow a more democratic system to evolve. If they don't, then they won't reach Marx's vision either. And real quickly, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between, say, socialism and National Socialism, because I think these two are often kind of confused. And socialism was just an economical and political theory advocating government ownership or regulation of the economic market, and it's considered a leftist ideology. But National Socialism, or also known as Nazism, is a form of fascism. Hitler was a fascist, Bush was not. This is a far-right ideology born of pseudo-scientific ideas regarding the purity of Aryan blood. There's a long ingrained anti-Semitism in it, and it pushed the German nationalistic movements back before World War II. And the goal of the National Socialists or the Nazis wasn't in fighting wealth inequality. It was conquering the world and exterminating all who opposed it, or who they deemed to be biologically inferior. That's why the Holocaust happened. Socialism and nationalism, they don't really have anything to do with each other than they simply share a word.
It's not because I'm that clever, it's because they gave me the good lines in the show. Turn on, tune in, drop on. Turn on, tune in, drop on. Turn on, tune in, drop on. Turn on, tune in, drop on.
Turn on with the beat mix, the spirit of the 60s. Smoked out hippies, psychedelic mystery tour. Hit record, cause there's so much more. We're on another level, hit a shovel, the deeper we go. Check your ego at the door, now you're free to explore. The inner working, soul searching. I play the dream merchant, never the same person. Just another strange version, democratic underground. When the sun will come around, hold it in the dark was the start of another sound.
You'll get caught, you'll get hooked.
Same cover but another book. It's worth another look. Come and check the second glance. Dance in the devil's brand. Second hand. The understudy that understands. Another plan. Another trance. Another land. I pledge allegiance to free spirits and deep lyrics. Shouldn't fear it. Run it back. Didn't hear it.
Now that we have an understanding about the distinctions between socialism, communism, and Marxism, I want to discuss the two prevalent ideologies in modern American politics: liberalism and conservatism. I think that when it comes to discussing these ideologies, we need to take a look at how each ideology views the individual's role in society. I think that's really where they differ the most. Meaning, what does the individual owe society? This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where they really diverge. A quick definition here of what I would say a modern liberal is. Modern liberalism is it's a political orientation that champions social justice issues and personal liberties and believes in government regulation and or intervention to achieve aims. Whereas the modern conservatism ideology is a political orientation that champions individual liberties and believes in little to no government interference in citizens' lives. They really value the free market, meaning let the market go, don't have the government interfere in it at all. So what's interesting is that modern conservatism is also known as classical liberalism, or is kind of born out of that, and which many would argue is the theory that the Founding Fathers used as a framework in drafting the Constitution and Bill of Rights. However, I don't think that if you look at the 10 basic tenets of classical liberalism according to Dr. Nigel Ashford of the Institute for Humane Studies at George Mason University, you can see that both modern liberalism and modern conservatism are reflected in it at some points, and that sometimes they diverge from it. So I'm quickly going to kind of read and maybe comment on the 10 principles that Dr. Ashford laid out, and how does the liberal and the conservative and modern society compare to this. So number one, the life of each individual is an absolute and universal moral value. No non-aggressive individual's life, liberty, or property may be legitimately sacrificed for any goal. So, you know, obviously maybe abortion could come into this if you wanted to talk about individual's life being sacrificed. But then obviously the argument is, when does life start? And we're not going to get into that. But when you go to number two, I think that kind of negates that thought of number one, because it says every individual owns their body, their mind, and the labor thereof, including the physical objects legitimately obtained through such labor. And I think that's kind of in Roe versus Wade, every individual owns their body. Well, that's why abortion is such a tough issue to talk about. But if you're a woman, you own your body, then that's your choice. And I always say, as a man, I don't even. That's why I don't really want to talk about or discuss abortion, because I'm not a woman. I don't know what it feels like to be pregnant. How could I really even comment on it? So I said earlier I wasn't really going to talk about abortion, and I actually talked a little bit about it again, but hopefully that's it. But as far as every individual owning their body, that's another reason why I think prostitution should be legal. It's your body. If that's your asset you have, if that's how you want to make money off of it, then that's your choice. And I don't know why something like that is illegal. And I think more conservatives than probably liberals feel that prostitution should be illegal. And so that kind of goes against that tenet of classical liberalism. Number three, every individual has the right to pursue activities for the betterment of his or her life, including its material, intellectual, and emotional aspects, by using their own body and property, as well as the property of consenting others. And again, I think the intellectual and emotional aspects by using their own body and property. Once again, why would prostitution be illegal if this is a basic tenet of classical liberalism? Number four, the rights of an individual's life, liberty, and property are inherent to that individual's nature. They are not granted by other human beings, and they cannot be taken away by that entity, by any entity. And I think here is where conservatives really stick to this tenet right here, and I think they believe this is where liberals stray quite a bit. They feel that their life, liberty, and property are inherent, and that so any gains they have, the government should interfere whatsoever in it. Shouldn't use the term redistribute anything, whereas liberals feel that there needs to be a level playing ground in certain areas. So that would probably be a discussion we have in a later show. Number five, the initiation of physical force, the threat of such force, or fraud against any individual is never permissive, regardless of the position and character of the initiator. However, proportionate force may be used to retaliate and defend against aggression. The term proportionate force on this is that's what really sticks out to me. And what does proportionate force mean? If somebody slaps you, you can only slap them back. Kind of those stand your ground laws. Conservatives feel more that proportionate force is if somebody's charging at you, you have the right to shoot them. And I don't exactly know where I stand on that. Like I said, when it comes to guns, I don't really care who has a gun, who owns one, I don't have a gun, never plan on having one. But if that's your choice, but if somebody's running at you, do you have the right to shoot them? It's hard to say, because are they 6 times bigger than you? What is proportionate force? So this one's a little tricky. Number six, the sole fundamental purpose of government is to protect the rights of individuals by engaging actions specifically delegated to the government by its constituents. Government is not the same as society, nor is the government entitled to sacrifice some non-aggressive individuals to advance the well-being of others. This could be seen in a few different ways. Was it to sacrifice some non-aggressive individuals? Does it mean to take from them, to take property, to take money from them, or to actually use their physical labor? Something such as slavery. If the founding fathers were using classical liberalism, then they should not have allowed slavery, because there was many non-aggressive individuals that were used to advance the well-being of others. But and then you could look at probably the conservative side of this would be that they would look at monetary issues as far as sacrificing their wealth for the advance and well-being of others. And I agree with that. You shouldn't say I'm just going to take money from A and give it to B. My argument would always lie in that A gets too much profit from the labor, and that's where I think that discussion should lie. So number seven, every individual has the absolute right to think and express any ideas. Thought and speech are never equivalent to force or violence, and ought never to be restricted or be subject to coercive penalties. And both parties have championed censorship at different times. I've included a link that kind of gives some history of censorship in America. Check that out. And even recently, you can look at President Bush with when he was campaigning, they had the Presidential Advance Manual, and I've included a link for that. And in that and this is a quote from that manual. There are several ways the advanced person can prepare a site to minimize demonstrators. First, as always, work with the Secret Service and have them ask the local police department to designate a protest area where demonstrators can be placed, preferably not in view of the event site or motorcade route. They are trying to control free speech, and I'm not picking on Bush because but this one really stuck out at me. And instead of allowing free speech, allowing people to say what they want in a public forum, they put these people in what they were called free speech zones, and that was one of the biggest. That was like right out of 1984 for me. But even most recently, Obama signed H.R. 347, and I've included links for that too. And H.R. 347, it's dangerous in its wording because it basically says that if the Secret Service is present at any kind of function, and if they deem somebody to be demonstrating to be unruly, that person could be arrested. And the wording is very vague. How far the Secret Service can take it is very vague. And something just simple as just demonstrating, as holding up a sign in a certain area, can get you arrested now, and that really goes against what the founding fathers wanted, as far as freedom of speech. And so both sides are guilty in that aspect. And number 8, commerce, technology, and science are desirable, liberating forces that are capable of alleviating historic ills, improving the quality of human life, and morally elevating human beings. The complete freedom of trade, innovation, and thought should be preserved and supported for all human beings in the world. And the complete freedom of trade, and that once again, that's more of a conservative tenet. That free markets. I could do a show in which I argue that the free market doesn't necessarily exist. So I'm not going to get any further into that. But where I think the conservatives diverge from this is that science is desirable, and that, I don't want to throw every conservative into this because I know a lot of conservatives. I'm friends with some conservatives, and really none of them are against science. Maybe a few of them do kind of deny climate change, which is based on science, but that it just makes me think of more of the religious right and their push against science, and that science never proves anything because science kind of goes against their dogma. So if you consider yourself a classical liberal, then you've got to accept what the science shows you. Number 9, accidents of birth, geography, or ancestry do not define any individual and should not result in man-made restrictions of that individual's rights or opportunities. Every individual should be judged purely on their personal qualities, including accomplishments, character, and knowledge. And what's key in this one is the accidents of birth or geography or ancestry. Well, I've included a link for what was called redlining. And redlining took place after World War II, in which many urban areas were redlined on maps, and that was areas in which banks would not loan money to. And that goes against that basic tenet of accidents of birth or geography. They used just a basic area, an urban area, poorer areas, and said we're not going to loan money in those areas. Now, you have a right to loan money to who you want, but you should look at every individual, check their credit, check what their kind of job they have, and make it on that decision, not just because an area is redlined. Because if you think about it, post-World War II up until, say, 1980s, people really built a lot of equity on their home. They would get a loan, they would get a home, they would, put money into that home, they would resell the home, things like that. Whereas the people in these urban areas, they never had that opportunity, and we see what's happened with these urban areas. So, redline in itself definitely goes against number 9 tenet, and both sides were guilty in that. And so number 10, there are no natural or desirable limits for human potential for good, and there is no substantive problem that is necessarily unsolvable by present or future human knowledge, effort, and technology. It is a moral imperative for humans to expand their mastery of the universe indefinitely and in such a manner that will reinforce the survival and flourishing of all non-aggressive individuals. And I think this is something that conservatives definitely believe in. That we've got to continue to expand and find new grounds to spread our way of life. And I don't have a problem with that either. I think where something on the liberal side maybe diverges from that is because this doesn't include survival of the earth and resources. Once again, like I said, we're destroying the very environment that we live in, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We have to find ways to get resources while we don't really destroy the environment or the climate. So, in looking at these, I think we can see ways in which modern liberals and modern conservatives reflect some aspects of the classical liberal ideology, and also we stray from it at some aspects of it. Both sides stray from it. But if you were to follow the tenets of classical liberalism, you would have to be a true libertarian, and I don't think that classical liberalism works in a post-industrial society. We're all too dependent on each other for our survival now. We don't live on farms. We don't grow our own food. I mean, I'm sure some of us do, but not like it used to be. Very few people actually lived in cities. People lived rural. They grew their own crops. They had their own animals that they used, and we don't live like that anymore in this post-industrial society. And our founding fathers could not foresee the way we live today. Uh, they created a system that was really designed to work for white male landowners, and the system's been continually tweaked for over the years. We've had 27 amendments to the Constitution. Uh, so a return to a pure classical liberalism, it's not going to happen. So anybody that says we need to return to what the Founding Fathers wants, needs to understand that it's just not possible. So where is the middle ground here? I mean, what's the greatest ideological difference between liberals and conservatives, and how can we find a middle ground? Yeah, I'd love your thoughts on this. Put a post on Facebook about this if you'd like. What do you think is the greatest divide between liberals and conservatives today, and more so, how can we come together to try to kind of close that rift a little bit? So as I stated earlier, I think that the greatest difference between liberal and conservative ideology lies in the notion of what the individual owes society. Um, to use an analogy that I used in a paper I wrote last year, conservatives see the world as a man on an island, whereas liberals see the world as an island of men. Sorry about setting up specific genders here, but a person on an island or island of persons or people that just didn't have the same ring to me when I was writing it. So my main argument in the paper, which I previously mentioned, was that the world has changed significantly since the drafting of the Constitution. Uh, I think that what we need to do is work together to define what the individual's role in society is in the 21st century, but while understanding that even the definition might change within our lifetime. So I'd like your thoughts on what you think the individual role is in society. Do you believe you're a man on an island or among an island of men? Let's have a conversation about that. Let's bring together some competing ideologies, and instead of rhetoric and rancor that constantly divides us, let's have a conversation.
You're surrounded by static. 'Cause we repel each other.
And so I guess this is going to conclude the end of the inaugural podcast of Left, Right, in the Middle. Ran a little bit longer than I wanted. I plan to hopefully have each show be about 45 minutes, but just trying to set up kind of the framework for the show and whatnot early on. Added a few extra minutes to it. So hopefully the next few shows will just be about 45 minutes, or the rest of my shows will be just about 45 minutes. But when it comes to ideologies, I could likely spend an entire show on just focusing on one ideology, but that's not what the show is going to be about. It's going to be about issues. I wanted to just provide some framework for future discussions. My hope is that your take from this show is that socialism does not equal communism, does not equal Marxism. I also hope that you have a better understanding of how modern liberal and conservative ideology compares to classical liberalism, and I have some thoughts you can bring to the conversation concerning where the competing ideologies can find a middle ground so that the man on an island can feel comfortable among the island of men. Ultimately, I think that when it comes to politics, our individual ideologies prevent us from knowing more than our political opponent. I mean, after all, your ideology is just your worldview. However, by becoming more informed about a political topic, you can present yourself as being more knowledgeable about an issue so that you're going to likely find that you and your political opponent aren't that different, and that through open and civil discourse, we might just be able to come to a compromise that serves society and not an ideology. Quick programming note before we end this is that my next podcast will be on healthcare, which I've already stated, but I'm actually going to be posting that in 3 weeks instead of 2. Following that, it will be every 2 weeks, but I initially wanted this show to start actually last week, but I got my audio equipment a little late, put me behind schedule, and the weekend that I would say produce the next show now, 2 weekends from now, is a weekend of having a family reunion. So I'm going to push back the healthcare podcast 1 week, and then I'll just fall in every 2 weeks after that. So look for the next episode, August 19th. And in the meantime, join the conversation about ideologies on Facebook. And thanks for listening.
I tried to learn, but there was too much information. Something else about it, and I never found my station. I didn't write down the words, so I have to fake it. I'm saying I think I'm gonna get this done, but no, I never really made it. But then you come around and try to talk to me that way. How you know I've been communicated to them. Communicated to them. Communicated